when I first started practicing in Georgia, you would see, I can't remember the exact term of it, but there's a separate regulation for knives that are defined in a certain way that becomes a deadly weapon, the equivalent of a handgun. In 1934, as a result of Prohibition and the availability of Tommy gun silencers and sawed-up shotguns to combat the efforts of the federal government to regulate alcohol, federal government passed regulations limiting Tommy gun silencers and sawed-off shotguns and making possession of those items illegal. In 1968, after the King assassination and the Kennedy assassination, there was a restriction by the National Registry, which related to folks with mental illness. And then in '86, the government was prohibited from having a registry, but only they can have a database. And then if you get down to the cases in 2008 or 1995, there was a test case of the Gun-Free School Act, which was a 1990 federal statute. A 12th grader took a .38 caliber to high school. He was going to sell it for $40. The administration got wind of it. He gets arrested. He gets indicted under the Gun-Free School Zone Act. Lawyer challenges it because that Gun-Free School Zone Act is based on the Commerce Clause. The Commerce Clause is the clause under which most federal regulation that reaches a local level is based. The rules and laws on discrimination are primarily based on the Commerce Clause, the statutes. There may be constitutional amendments, the 13th and 14th Amendment about slavery and due process, but the ability to impose that on the states was done through the Commerce Clause. The Supreme Court, however, in that case, in a 5-4 decision, which is a close decision, decided that that act was unconstitutional and a violation of the Commerce Clause because general police powers and policing powers are reserved for the states under the 9th and 10th Amendments, and that if we were to take the Commerce Clause and allow it to regulate weapons on a local level, that Commerce Clause would then become and be given general policing power. Okay? So that case should assuage people who have fear that naturally and by law, the Supreme Court would let the federal government regulate guns locally to the point of being able to take them away. In 2008, the Supreme Court decided a case called Heller, and the outcome of Heller is that the court decided that the Second Amendment gives you the right to have a weapon for personal self-protection. So when the Second Amendment is now given the meaning and power of allowing the individual to possess a weapon for self-defense, that kind of takes away the argument that the government can come to your house and take away your weapon on the militia grounds because you can still keep it for self-defense. So, as a result of Heller, an argument is now made that that undermines the absolutist argument of being able to take weapons or keep weapons and have weapons as part of the civilian militia. In 2010, there's a case out of Chicago, Oak Park, and Chicago had a gun on possession of handguns by private citizens. The court struck that down. And there is a recent case out of the 7th Circuit, which is the area where Chicago is. It was it was mid-December, I think. And they decided, the 7th Circuit has decided that a regulation prohibiting concealed weapons is unconstitutional, because if the Supreme Court says the Second Amendment allows possession of a weapon for self-defense, the need for self-defense is not only in your house, but it is wherever you need it and when you need it. So that case is in the Seventh Circuit. Other circuits have not yet decided that issue. That issue may or may not eventually be decided by the Supreme Court. But that is where the Supreme Court is heading on the Second Amendment. And so the bottom line is, you may possess a weapon for self-defense. Self-defense is, some people would argue, the premise or ground upon which one can reach a stalemate with his neighbor and creates the formation of the reason to talk and be reasonable and think, if you can shoot me, I can shoot you, and if I can shoot you, you can shoot me, and this is safe. Let's work it out. So self-defense is really the start of when people can start talking, and the Supreme Court is protecting, has come forward and said directly, you can own a handgun and keep a handgun for self-defense. I could go on a while, but I'd be too much. There.
My name is Robert Fortane. I'm with the Richmond County Sheriff's Office, as Dr. Reed said, and as he said, I worked in the narcotics field for roughly some 26, 27 years. I noticed in the brochure and the paperwork that I received, you talked about your experience with gun violence. Well, I know that I've probably been involved in about 5 to 10 gun battles and wounded in one, and had at least 2 officer-involved shootings where an officer shot, and then several where suspects were killed. So I know from personal experience about gun violence, whether it be senseless in the community or senseless in a police-involved shooting, which we always regret, that do happen and do occur because one just has to read it. And I have worked, as I said, in the drug field. And in the drug field, obviously, we encountered guns. We encountered guns, probably, we were receiving somewhere around 250 to 300 a year. And we've been doing that year in and year out for probably 10 to 15 years or better. So we encounter firearms all the time. I have several guns of my own. I have many guns. I didn't always buy them. I inherited a lot of them from my dad, and he passed away. I do believe in the Second Amendment right. I own hunting guns. I don't have any assault weapons. I don't think any of my guns fire over 8 rounds, the ones that I do own. And that is a design that I'm issued, actually, so it only fires 8 rounds. I think as I've read since I was invited to come here, and over the things that have happened, which the school shooting, the shooting that occurred in Denver, the one that occurred in Phoenix with the, I believe the House of Representatives shooting, all of those particular ones, it was the person in that particular occasion, obviously, compared to the weapon itself. The weapon was an instrument of destruction. Regrettably, I've seen other ones, even locally here. I'm just thankful that we've not had any more encounters in the narcotics field or even in the law enforcement field. We saw that the one that occurred with Jason Paul recently, that involved an assault rifle. It was legally obtained. Nobody really knows anything because all the participants there, they all passed away. The shooter and Officer Paul on that particular occasion. So we don't know what the mindset was. I don't understand the mindset of some of these people and why they do what they do. In a police perspective, can we put officers in every school? Yeah, if somebody wants to pay, can we put every officer in every school? Only thing I wonder about that at that particular time, because I know that the school that my son goes to, you know, they have a door, you got to buzz in, and they let you in. This particular case, I think the one that occurred recently, he did get buzzed in, but where's the officer going to be at? Do you know if he's going to be in the back of the school? And how many people are going to be shot prior to him ever arriving on the scene, even if he's there? There's many times that, we wish we could go in and stop something before it ever occurs, but usually we are reacting to a situation at that particular time. We're not able to stop it before it ever starts. I think I guess one thing that I'd like to say is, over the years, I've changed somewhat attitude, and probably do we need to open some dialogue. I'm concerned probably about the assault weapons. Although there is a small percentage of assault weapons used in crimes in Richmond County, we encountered them more and more frequently over the last 10 years in narcotics in the last 5 years. Most of these rifles that we encountered were the AK-47, the SDS variety. Well, when you're a drug agent, you're going to do a drug warrant. Usually you just have a firearm or sidearm. I just thank God that we've not had a suspect that decided to open up one of these assault rifles, because we wouldn't stand a chance at that particular time. And most of the time, the weapons that we would need are back in the vehicle itself, because we don't go around just toting our assault weapons, and which we own, or the department owns, and indiscriminately use them on drug rates, because they're not necessary all the time. We don't feel like, and I don't feel like, we never did use them in very high-risk warrant situations. So I guess I'll just close with this. I think there is room for dialogue about the weapons. I don't know so much about high-capacity magazines. I can see where that's an issue now. High-capacity magazines or high-capacity magazines, an old reality. I can tell you right now, you can't find any. We can't even buy any law enforcement. We can't even buy bullets right now. That's what all this panic and hysteria is caused. Ammunition can't be obtained. We need ammunition for training purposes. Farms that were going for $1,000 that we can purchase. Now we can't even purchase them. There's a long waiting list. We can't even equip our people with the necessary farms and stuff. We need to be able to do our jobs. But I do think there's room for dialogue. I mean, there's a lot of issues with the gun debate. I don't think the government, I was talking to the sheriff the other day, because he said he had a debate in sheriff's school about the same subject. And there were sheriffs that were saying that the government's going to take the farms away. I don't believe the government's coming to take farms away. I don't believe that you're going to see, I saw a cartoon today, I saw it in the farm. There's not going to be a drone that's going to show up at your doorstep trying to pull your gun from your hand. If it was, you couldn't do nothing about it anyway. So you got to remember that. So I don't really believe that there is something to take guns away from the people. Regulate a little more? Sure, why not? I mean, I'm not against it. I don't think that, as Jack said, it's a law, which he understands a whole lot better about the function. I don't think they're going to take the guns away. I don't believe it ever will be. But regulation a little bit, or maybe some of these assault weapons, I'm open to discussion with you.
I'm chairman of emergency medicine at Georgia Regents University, and I have it written right here, so I actually get it right. You don't say Pamplin College of Georgia or Georgia Health Sciences University. Dealing with gunshot wounds has been something that throughout my career I've dealt with. I spent 10 years in the Army, as well as an emergency medicine physician. And it's really been one of the areas that I've focused much of my research efforts on looking at ways that we can improve hemorrhage control and improve survivability of gunshot wounds. So my perspective is a little bit different than my esteemed panel here. I think I look at things a little bit differently, and I try to give you a little bit of the physician's perspective. So, gunshot wounds are the second leading cause of injury death in the United States. What do we think the number one would be? So, automobiles. It's actually interesting that automobile fatality rates have dropped over the years, and that's largely due to some of the things, improved airbags, and some of the measures that have taken place to improve safety in vehicles. I think that's what we're talking about today, is are there ways we can do similar things with firearms. There are approximately somewhere around 30,000 to 35,000 fatalities from gunshot wounds a year within the United States, and approximately twice that number that are non-fatal gunshot wounds. So somewhere a little over 100,000 people a year in the United States are shot. If you look at that, only approximately 1/3 of individuals who get shot actually die from their gunshot wounds. So you think of that, well, 2/3 chance to live. If I were in Vegas, those are pretty good odds. However, you still have significant morbidity and disability, even if you're a survivor from gunshot wounds. Interestingly, so the 66% of individuals who come into the emergency department who have been shot, approximately 40% of those are actually going to get discharged home without ever being admitted to the hospital. So it's a relatively small percentage of individuals who get shot who actually end up admitted to the hospital. But those that do get admitted have incredibly complex wounds, very long hospital stays involving intensive care units, very long disability and rehabilitation, and the cost is extremely high. So there was a study done by Charity Hospital several years ago, and they looked at the cost, all comers, the 100,000 people shot per year, and they estimated that it cost about $19,000 per person who got shot for the medical bill. So there's an enormous financial impact on our society just from the gunshot wounds themselves. So our trauma center, we are level 1 trauma center that takes care of our region. Last year, we had 173 trauma activations. So to be a trauma activation, you have to have a significant injury that involves the proximal extremities close to the body or the trunk, or have unstable vital signs. So we see another 60 or 70 or so in addition to those. So we see somewhere around 230, 240 gunshot wounds a day. So most days we're seeing gunshot wounds coming into our facility. Now, what we see in our area, it's evolving. The majority of what we see are handgun injuries, most of them involving criminal activity, although we see a substantial of individuals who come in related to suicide attempts or accidental shootings. So the problem here is a very large problem, and we kind of look at, so what can we do about it? So from my perspective, I focused on once somebody's injured, how do we help those individuals? I've worked on national committees trying to establish triage protocols to identify individuals that would benefit most by getting the EMS personnel to the victims. What I said that you look at, one thing I didn't bring out is if you look at the 33% of individuals that die from gunshot wounds, 70% of those individuals never make it to the hospital alive. So my focus on research is to try to increase that number of individuals who can make it to the hospital alive so we can bridge that time from being injured in the field, get them to the hospital. So when we look at what we can do from a legislative standpoint, we shouldn't forget about things like making sure we have an adequate trauma system, making sure that EMS is adequately funded, making sure that we're funding our mental health field so that we are helping individuals both from self-inflicted gunshot wounds from suicidal individuals, as well as trying to identify and diffuse potential perpetrators. So those are really my comments, focusing primarily on the medical aspects. I don't know as much about the law, but those are my perspectives from a medical standpoint. Thanks very much.
Well, good evening. My name is Gordon Rondo. I come to you tonight to share a perspective perspective on gun violence is just a little different. I do not have any of the educational or the professional background of any of the people with whom I share the panel tonight. But I come by my knowledge on this subject the hard way. As Dr. Reese has suggested, I have a daughter, Renee, who was a victim of homicide. And as a consequence of that, my wife and I have spent the last 19 years, we formed a nonprofit organization that ministers to the needs of crime victims in the aftermath of crime. We've spent a lot of time on legislative initiatives to support those causes, both at the state and at the federal level. And we also have worked hard to promote the cause of crime prevention all over the country. A consequence of which is we have a scholarship program in our daughter's name here in what is now known as Georgia Regents University. My intent is not to get into the specifics of gun policy with my few minutes here, because I think we'll probably have a lot of time during the course of the evening to get into those kinds of details. What I want to do is express my appreciation, first of all, to you, the audience, to the panel, and specifically Dr. Reese for putting on what I think is a very important and critical first step in establishing what I hope will be an ongoing dialogue, not just about gun violence, but on crime and violence in general. That's really where we want to be. Gun violence is an important component of that, but it is not, in my view, the fundamental problem that puts us all at risk. So I'm going to spend my time giving you a little bit of a perspective from a parent who's lost a daughter. And I will, I suppose, as I go through my remarks, reflect a bit of frustration that's not just mine, but it is on the community of survivors like myself who have sat through these sessions before. You should know that I am not a gun owner. Nonetheless, I respect the Second Amendment, and I absolutely support the right of an individual to own a weapon for protection and any other legitimate means, as long as that individual is legally qualified and trained. So what I'm going to talk about a little bit is the fact that my daughter was murdered as a consequence of an armed robbery and home invasion. Now, she wasn't killed with a gun, but there is any question in my mind that that gun facilitated the crime. Had those two not had a gun, I think my daughter would still be alive. So as you can imagine, I have some pretty strong feelings about guns and gun violence, and specifically the incredible amount of hardware, gun hardware, that's out there in circulation, and the ease of access to that kind of weaponry, all right? That's a real concern to me. Now, my daughter was, interestingly enough, one of 938 homicides in the city of Chicago in 1994. Now, think about that. 938. There were over 24,000 that same year. And since then, we have seen to it that we've taken another 13 to 20,000 lives every year, 2/3 or 3/4 of which are caused with guns. So you'll forgive me for being a bit pessimistic, but I've sat through these kinds of sessions before. So here we sit again in 2013, coming off a year, 2012, that for me made it seem as though mass murder had become commonplace in the United States of America. And I'm left, as a survivor of a homicide victim, to wonder, have we not learned anything for the last 19 years? Why is it that the greatest nation on earth, can't come to grips with the scourge of gun violence? And I'm left to answer lots of why questions. can't we decide what the problem is and on a course of action? Why can't we decide that guns make a bad problem that much worse? Why is it we're unable to make a connection between the sheer availability of guns and a gun violence rate that exceeds every other advanced society on Earth by a factor of 10, 15, or 20? And finally, I really struggle with this one. Why we can't understand that the Second Amendment can coexist peacefully with sensible gun laws that are meant strictly to keep guns out of the wrong hands. I'm talking about criminals, crazy people, and kids. Now, you know, I'm 74 years old. And my America impressed me at one time that we could solve any problem, take on any challenge. We beat Hitler, went to the moon and back, and more recently we took on the scourge of international terrorism. We lost 3,000 people 12 years ago, and we took on an effort, a great national commitment in my mind, to do what we could to ensure that that never ever happened again. Well, let me tell you, we need to make the same kind of a commitment for domestic terrorism. And that's exactly what we've got, folks, because we've got a lot of scared people running around this town, this country. But as I said at the outset of my remarks, we need to go beyond gun violence, because we need to begin to look at the root causes of crime and violence. We need to ask ourselves why so many people in this country turn to lives of crime and violence. Now, the two who took my daughter's life, their case histories are instructive. They were born in one of America's great urban wastelands, the west side of Chicago. Now, I haven't been there, wouldn't dare go, don't recommend it. That is a part of the earth, ladies and gentlemen, that is absolutely devoid of human possibility and opportunity. And these two grew up in that world. And I got to tell you, folks, they made some choices early on that led them to become hardcore, violent, recidivist criminals. In every sense of the word, we have no right to expect that two people living that way and under those conditions could have turned out any differently. Now, the good news is we caught them and we put them away. The bad news is there's more coming, and lots of them. So we have to find a way to influence the choices that kids make early on in the cycle so that they're not becoming like the two who killed my daughter, and that they become instead contributing, constructive members of the society. But of course, that's a subject for another day. So I want to just end my comments by saying thank you very much for listening to me. And I look forward to an informative and respectful conversation.
My husband and I have been married for 51 years, and he is so adamant about this message. And if I'm shaking, it's because we're like twins when we work with crime victims. But I'm going to try to be brief, and maybe we can take this up at another time. But Gordon and I were shocked, angered, confused. We didn't know how our wonderful daughter who went to this college, went on to the Sorbonne in France, spoke 4 foreign languages, was working with an international community, worked and lived in Japan, worked and lived in France, and was working and living in this nation as a contributing citizen of this society. She was simply walking home in her own neighborhood, and these 2 recidivist criminals, she was a prostitute from the age of 12, and he had done his first murder at the age of 14. As Gordon said, they grew up in the urban wasteland, and what choices did they have? Because nobody was coming forward to help them at their time of need. Anyway, that's another story. We worked for 12 years for Fight Crime, Invest in Kids, as their national victim outreach spokesman, talking about the root causes of crime and violence and legislation that we could pass in order to ensure that our kids are going to be growing up straight. But I want to tell you a little bit about our experience with gun violence over the past 18 years. For 18 years, we have marched with 1 million moms. We have put shoes on the steps of the government houses in Atlanta, Georgia. Silent March was what it was called. We have joined a Chicago Memorial, Children's Memorial Hospital's handgun epidemic lowering plan, the health program with Dr. Kathy Christopher Calver. We have gone ahead and worked with a group that started a bike ride. Excuse me if I'm a little nervous because there's 18 years of thoughts coming into my head, and I have to explain to you. At the last minute, Dr. Reed said, yes, you can talk. So my speech is back there. Okay. So I've got 18 years of thoughts going through my head, but we have done everything possible. We have ridden bikes with the kids from Columbine, West Paducah, Jonesboro, Springfield, Oregon, from Hampton, Virginia, to Washington, D.C., in a 200-mile march on bikes with bike cops, with law enforcement guiding our way for 200 miles. Do you know how much attention we got from the people of this nation? None. 0. These were kids calling out for 4 solid years. Notice me. Here's my message. We are survivors of the victims of the Columbines and the West Paducahs, and the Jonesboros, and the Springfields, and the Californians. And it goes on and on and on. And I'm not lecturing, but our adventure with this crime problem has been going on since 1982, when our best friend was shot in cold blood in Washington, D.C. Dr. Yosi Mushala, a professor of psychology at Howard University. He had 8 children. He opened a little restaurant, and 2 parolees came in with sawed-off shotguns and shot him in cold blood when he begged them not to hurt the other members that were at the restaurant. So it goes on and on. When the Virginia Tech massacre occurred, Gordon and I put together a committee of 125 people and 15 major organizations: the National Organization of Victim Assistance, the National Organization of Parents of Murdered Children. We put together people from the Brady Campaign, the Maryland Crime Victims Resource Center, and on and on and on. And we went up to Virginia Tech, and we gave them a resolution that we will help those victims of crime. We will help those survivors and those families. And guess what the president of that university did? He ignored our plea. He ignored the professionals from all across the United States. He was in denial. He did not want anybody to know the atrocity that was going on. This is the truth. The politics and bureaucracy would not let our message go from our victim advocates, our specialists in criminal justice, our law enforcement, and all of the people that joined us in the pledge. They wouldn't let us help those victims. So we've gone beyond that now. We are really now working, as Gordon said, for crime prevention. I still remember working in another of our campaigns with Dr. Arthur Kellerman from the Rollins School of Public Health at Emory University. Dr. Kellerman started a forum. It took us 6 months to plan it. It was called Youth and Deadly Weapons. We got experts from Washington, D.C. and all over the state of Georgia to come Emory University to discuss the problem of youth and deadly weapons. Do you know where that went? Nowhere. And Dr. Arthur Kellerman, as our good doctor here knows the truth, Dr. Kellerman had a grant from the Centers for Disease Control, CDC, to do research on the root causes of gun violence and to come up with the statistics to show the truth to people whether guns were deadly or not. And the CDC had to take those funds away because the NRA put pressure on the CDC to take away those research funds. Now, I'm not getting into an argument with the NRA. I think we should work with the NRA. Well, I have friends who say, oh, we have to attack the NRA, and I said, no, we don't attack them. We work together, and we hope that the NRA will come together with the directives that President Obama and his committee has come up with for the very valuable directives that are related to assault weapons ban and all ones that you know about. I'm trying to hurry up so that all the other people can speak here. So sometimes when you're hurrying, you can't talk. So I want to end with a story, and I hope that this hasn't been too much of a jumble, but I want to tell you that we have worked with hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of victims of crimes across the nation. Our phone rings every day for someone to say, please help us to find justice. Please help us to keep these parolees in jail. Please help us to talk about the restitution and rehabilitation of criminals, and it is a very complex problem. As you can see from all of these experts that are here, it's so complex, and what do? We have to work collectively. You have to come, and we have to work together. We can't just do it alone. We have to work together. So I want to end with this story. Gordon doesn't like this story too much, but I love this story. When we were working with Dr. Arthur Kellerman over at Emory University, we thought we were coming up with some solutions. But one of the doctors there, one of the PhDs, I should say, not a medical doctor, he begged to differ at the end of the conference, and he stood up and he said, ladies and gentlemen, let me tell you this. We've been discussing this for years and years and years. He said, I want to tell you a wonderful story about a tsunami and an island. He said there was an island in the middle of the Pacific Ocean. He said this island keeps getting attacked by the tsunami, by the great tsunami wave. And he said, so the people don't know what to do. Some of the people survive and some of the other people don't survive. But this tsunami keeps coming to this wonderful island in the middle of the Pacific. So the three wise men came to a conclusion. One said, I know what we can do. We'll just move the people. The second one said, no, we'll just move the island. And the third one said, no, the solution is we're just going to have to learn to live underwater. Well, are we going to learn to live with the violence in this nation? Are we going to accept norm as a norm? Crime and violence? This is the question I want to ask you right now. If you can climb into the shoes of everyone that's here, and if you can climb into my shoes and my husband's shoes and all of the hundreds of victims that we've worked with, you will understand that we are living in a mass violent nature. Our nation has become a culture of violence. So thank you very much.
I'm the DA here in the Augusta Circuit, the three-county circuit, Burke, Richmond, and Columbia County. I wish that I could tell you what typical gun violence was in this county or in this circuit is, but I can't, because until this has happened to you, it is not typical. The first murder case that I helped try back when I was a new prosecutor was a case where a man had been shot to death in his mother's front yard. So not only did his mother have to come out and find him, but that was her second son who had been murdered. Her first son had been gunned down in someone else's yard. To her, that is a typical gun incident. If you live in a neighborhood where that is a behavior that happens, then to you, that is typical gun violence. Last week in Columbia County, we sentenced a case to the juvenile court where a 14-year-old was playing with a gun and shot a friend and killed her. If that's your family, no matter what side you're on, that is typical gun violence to you. When I was in law school back in the 90s, I was in Macon, Georgia, and Bibb County put metal detectors in their courthouses for the very first time. And as I was going through the metal detectors after the end of the first month to get into the courthouse, I stopped and talked to the security guards to find out what kind of things that they had caught coming through the metal detectors. And they detailed for me the number of knives and other types of weapons, and then they told me about how many guns they had found in the first 30 days. And I presumed erroneously that all of the people who had been caught bringing guns and knives in this courthouse were people who were coming for criminal court. And almost to a man or a woman, as I found out, I was wrong. The majority of the people who had been coming into that courthouse that were bringing weapons with them were women, and they were involved in domestic relations cases. To them, that need for protection was the typical need that they had at that time in their life, and could have reported, or could have resulted, in a violent situation, but apparently never did. This week in Richmond County, we have a young lawyer, he's actually seated out here tonight, who's trying a case, and we're waiting for a verdict to come in. The jury will come back and continue to deliberate tomorrow. In his case, a 16-year-old shot at a uniformed officer driving a very large marked police truck after the officer turned on the blue light to make sure that this 16-year-old knew that he was law enforcement. To many people in law enforcement, that is becoming typical gun violence. We have all sorts of cases that are pending. In the last 18 to 24 months, we've had a tremendous rise in the number of seriously aggressive and violent domestic violence cases, whether they result in homicide or not. We don't have a typical murder in this circuit. I don't know that there is anything that is a typical murder, particularly when it affects your family, your neighborhood, your place of business. Many people, when they hear that there has been some sort of gun violence associated with a mall or shopping plaza or some public forum, will refrain from going there. That lets us know just how far the impact of violence can reach. It doesn't only affect the people who know the victims or who know the perpetrators or who go to those places. It affects everyone in that community and can bring that community down. Colonel Partain, talked about the number of guns that the narcotics office has been seizing. We take those guns from those offenders and we destroy them. We keep those guns from getting back out on the street and circulating again. In order to do that, we have to sue the gun. I know it sounds crazy, but that's what we do. And many times it costs us money to go through that process, that legal process. But it's something that we do to make sure that those guns don't get put back in circulation. The majority of those guns that we're taking off of drug offenders, and the majority of guns that we recover from armed robberies, from homicides, from aggravated assaults, are junk guns. They're not high-end, they're not high caliber, they jam easily, they're usually in bad condition. Most of those guns are junk guns. They're not sold in normal, legitimate legal circles. They're traded for drugs, they're traded for sex, they're traded for other weapons. They're traded for cars, for the use of cars, for staying in somebody's house. They're loaned out, they're borrowed, they're returned, they're left in the woods, and they're easy to find. Some of them come from legitimate households, like you heard about Dr. Reed's losing 3. I can't tell you how many of the guns that we recover are stolen, because the majority of the guns, when we run them, don't come back as stolen, because the people who have lost them don't have the serial numbers. So we don't have an accurate count of how many of those guns that are being used in violent activity are actually stolen. Last week, the Georgia State Patrol announced that they would start using assault rifles to protect the Capitol and to protect the governor. You might have seen some of those pictures. They actually got the guns just in time to be well armed when they had a gun rally up at the Capitol last week. I think it was Friday. There was some interesting dialogue that went on in that, but basically the feeling is that a public forum, a government forum, has been created as a target in the minds of so many people. And where we see that the people who want to hurt those in these target locations come in with armament, they need to be faced with the same type of armament by those who are going to be the protectors. One of the things that has increased, I think, since Sandy Hook, or since Columbine, or since any of these incidents where we have someone who's going into a public forum, whether it is a capitol, or a school building, or a movie theater, or shopping mall, or any other place, is what do we do with those people who are mentally ill? And the saying that I hear so often is that somebody needs to do something. And I hate that statement. Because who is somebody and what is something? We can't do it in the criminal justice system unless there is a criminal case that's pending, which means that we are reacting to something that has already occurred, whether it's resulted in harm, physical, emotional, or something else. So our business involvement in doing something is reactionary, not preventionary. We have tried to respond in a new fashion, but when you start talking about the cost of treating a gunshot wound, start talking about the cost of long-term mental health care and the way to get it and the way to ensure that the recommendations are being followed, the drugs are being administered, and that no other drugs are being added to that cocktail such that people aren't out there self-medicating and messing up the good that is being given to them. We've added a mental health component to some of our sentences, and we've found local providers here in the area who are willing to take on persons who have criminal charges, who aren't under a court sentence, and to try to provide them with a place to go during the day, try to provide them with access to medical care, to mental health care, to the appropriate prescriptions, and getting those drugs and ensuring that they're actually taking those drugs and not giving them away or selling them to somebody else. But the compliance of that patient is only as good as we are making it or they are making it. Once they are gone, they're difficult to find, and they're difficult to continue to treat. I believe that those persons who are in that precarious mental health state are also potential victims. And people tend to prey on the weak, and they prey on the vulnerable, whether they are small children, or whether they are the elderly, or whether they are someone who is mentally compromised or physically compromised in some way. And for us, ensuring that those persons who, because of their mental health component, are having a hard time assimilating into society, for us, ensuring that those persons are protected is an even greater problem. You may remember that there was a case where there was a lady who was assaulted in a downtown neighborhood, and her body was ultimately found in a trash can. She had a precarious mental health state. Her community had tried very hard to provide for her, and tried very hard to watch out for her, and her neighbors were very cognizant of her, but in the end, they were not able to protect her. I grew up with guns. We had them in the house. We used them for hunting. I learned how to shoot at a very early age. For the last 16 years since I've been working in and with law enforcement, I find that when I go out into public forums, like so many other people in law enforcement, I want to gauge the crowd. I want to know where the exits are. I want to see who else is around, who might be carrying a gun, might be carrying a weapon, and how they are all acting. I have a heightened sense of security awareness because of what I do. I think that the rest of the world, because of the things that we are getting faced with and throughout the media, are beginning to have that heightened sense as well. I encourage you to be aware of your surroundings at all times, to always be looking for things that aren't normal. Just because you're looking for something that doesn't appear right doesn't mean that there's something wrong with you. It just means that you're paying attention. Thank you.
I'm Dean Craig, and for the 12 years before I left the district attorney's office, this was my trial partner. And between the two of us, we actually tried more death penalty cases than any prosecutors, not only in Georgia, but so far as I know, east of Texas. And so we certainly have seen our share of man in humanities or man and violent criminal activities. Just to let you know how prevalent it is in your community, though, I'll tell you a couple of stories. The first story is about the last case I actually tried. It was not a death penalty case. But it was one warm spring afternoon after school had gotten out, and it was in Harrisburg, which was the neighborhood where I spent my youth. And Richmond County Sheriff's Department got called. I'm sure Colonel Partain was a part of the responding group to a shooting that had occurred on Hicks Street between East Street and Crawford Avenue. And in fact, individuals were using rifles and were holed up in two different houses and were shooting at each other from house to house and across Hicks Street. Hold that thought for just a minute. While that was going on and police were responding there, there was an unrelated event that was occurring 4 blocks away at Pamplin Street. Pamplin Street runs alongside the Platt Funeral Home and also runs from East Street to Crawford Avenue. And at a home that faced Fenwick Street, a young man went to a group of friends who were assembled in the front yard for the purpose of announcing to them that he had just gotten the results of his GED test and he had passed, and how proud he was. And as he got into the yard, unbeknownst to him, there was a group of youngsters, 3 of them in a car that had come down from the Mount Auburn neighborhood, Sand Hills neighborhood, which is adjacent to the Augusta Country Club. And they were looking for one of the group in that yard. The young man was coming to announce his accomplishment to. And as they passed by that yard, this had nothing to do with the house-to-house shootout that was going on 4 blocks away. But as they passed that yard, they fired a shot into the group, and they killed the young man who had just passed his GED and was innocent as the driven snow. That was just one spring afternoon in Harrisburg, which is just, as you know, a few blocks away from the medical college, and it's where the Kroc Center is, and it's the place where we have some hopes that life might change. Let me tell you another story, because I think it has application here. A lot of what I do in the Superior Court, about 50% of my cases are divorce cases. Last week I was hearing a divorce case between this couple, and it seemed like there really wasn't that much dissension between them, but they were in divorce court. One had filed divorce against the other, and the story was that they both had worked in the family business, and that the father, the patriarch of the family, had recently remarried and had, for the most part, replaced the wives, this couple that was getting divorced, replaced the wife's responsibility by inserting his new wife into the stepmother, if you will, into the business. And so money was tight. This couple already was in arrears, they charged cars and whatnot. And it turns out, as the facts are presented to me, when on the afternoon when the wife decided that she could no longer work in the environment of the family business, the husband goes and files for divorce. And so I said to them, I don't understand the connection here. The money's tight, the family business changes, and so you file for divorce. I said, that's about like if I were to come home one evening, this would be a good evening, for example, and I miss dinner, and so I find my dinner in the microwave, and it's cold, and I'm disappointed that it's cold. So I shoot the dog. You see, the cause and effect there just does not connect. Cause and effect doesn't connect. So now let's go to Schoolhouse Rock, for those of you who are my age and slightly younger. And remember the Saturday morning version of I'm Just a Bill, where you get the bill dropped and before it becomes law, it's just a bill, and then it gets passed by one house of Congress, and it gets passed over to the other house of Congress, and if both houses pass it, then it gets passed on to the president, and voila, it's a law. And it may be a constitutional law, it may not be a constitutional law, but that gets passed on to ultimately to the highest courts in the land to make a determination about constitutionality. And so I suggest to you that for us to have a discussion here tonight about how we're going to go about passing laws to restrict the use of guns in our society is perhaps not realistic. It's not realistic. For several reasons, one of which is there are probably 500 million to 700 million guns in this country, and that may be an underestimation. And they simply cannot be and will not be accounted for, confiscated, or regulated. So we can talk about passing legislation in that regard, but it's highly unlikely it's going to pass. And then we go back to what Jack Batson started this evening by saying to you, and that is the Second Amendment gives you an absolute or constitutional right to bear arms. So let's try to stick with the reality, and the reality is you're not going to get legislation that's going to restrict that constitutional right. But let's examine what's, patterns are very important. We need to be able to go back and study patterns that have developed and which might actually have something to do with the lot that we find ourselves in at this time. First of all, in 1992, throughout this country, we waved a magic wand over all of our mental health facilities where we actually kept seriously mentally ill people detained. We waved a magic wand over them and declared them healed. Thou art healed. Leave. And now we can find those people. We can find a lot of those people. I don't know a number, I'm not going to call out an arbitrary. Find a lot of those people in the penitentiaries. A lot of them. Since 1992, the penitentiary system of Georgia has gone from a population of 23,000 to 60,000. 23,000 in 1992, 60,000 today. I'm not going to say to you that's where all of the difference is made up of mentally ill people. I'm just telling you that those people who we would have been able to show the compassion for treatment, we release, and then we simply process through as criminals, and we can find them in the penitentiary. That's a pattern that we ought to pay attention to. Ashley alluded to it just a few moments ago. Secondly, we don't have any way of significantly reducing the number of guns in the hands of criminals and mentally ill people. We don't. The guns will last hundreds of years, as you know. They don't rust out if reasonably kept out of the weather and taken care of. We do not have a way of getting those guns out of the hands of criminals and seriously mentally ill people. Now, we have a lot of liberties in our country, and we pride ourselves on those liberties. But there's a price to pay for all of these so-called liberties that we enjoy in our country. And we have absolutely no restriction on the dissemination of broadcast programming and videos of some of the most horrendously violent, murderous behavior that you could ever imagine. I'll venture to say that there are very few people in this room who have ever bothered to see such videos. But people who engage in violent, murderous behavior watch those videos, and they emulate what they see on the broadcast programming and those videos, and including the games. And so, see, we're not talking anymore about the Second Amendment, are we? We're now talking about the First Amendment. And we've got a segment of our society that waves that First Amendment in our faces constantly. I have an absolute right to say and distribute any sort of material whatsoever. And perhaps they do. We're bound by what the United States Supreme Court says about that, aren't we? But there's a price to pay. Now, just as we speak about regulating gun ownership, Americans might also think about whether or not they want to restrict the liberties that they enjoy with regard to this programming and dissemination of videos of this murderous behavior that people emulate and that we have seen over and over again in our streets. I haven't even begun to mention the man's inhumanity to man that I see every single day in a courtroom, and which is shared via Facebook. Of course, MySpace is in the minority now. Twitter and texting. I see the most horrendous, violent sort of expressions between individuals that you could ever imagine. And the question is, are we interested whatsoever in reining in this level of vitriol, this hatred, this threatening behavior that ultimately can get acted upon and does when we see the domestic violence and the murders in domestic settings? So we started out our discussion this evening talking about guns and what to do about guns, but I think that we shouldn't forget that we ought to be concerned about what we are saying to each other, what we are disseminating to our youth, what we're disseminating to people who might not have a mental filter in order to determine whether or not to emulate certain behavior. Well, one thing we do know as a society is this: you are what you eat. You are what you eat. And your children are what you feed them. If you feed them Twinkies at every meal, well, you know what to expect, right? And if you feed them the alphabet soups, I call it, ABC, NBC, CBS, BET, you name it. If you keep feeding your children alphabet soups, well, that's what they're going to be. And you shouldn't expect them to be anything else. If you gave them Twinkies, you wouldn't expect them to be anything else, would you? So don't feed them this material and expect them to be anything other than this material. So my suggestion to you, therefore, is when we start lining up the issues and learning and thinking of how to deal with the issues, don't shoot the dog. Don't shoot the dog. Thank you.
I'm Kim Davies, and I'd like to begin by thanking Dr. Gilbert for including me on such a distinguished panel. As a citizen and a social scientist, I view the issue of gun laws and legislation through progressive lenses with what I'm going to say are wary eyes. I'm with many of you who felt deeply emotional when we learned of the tragedy of Sandy Hook. I thought of those whose lives were cut short, but more so I grieved for those kids who survived but watched their friends needlessly gunned down. And I grieved for the parents and family who would never see their loved ones again. Their lives invariably changed. As details surfaced, I learned as many as you did that in a matter of minutes, Adam Landa had used his mother's legally obtained semi-automatic rifle to fire as many as 50 to 100 rounds. I learned that Landa shot many of his victims several times. I learned that he had mental health issues and his mother was having trouble getting help for him. And I felt numb, perhaps even traumatized, because once you took away that so many of the victims were such little victims, such little children, none of the details actually shocked or surprised me. Whether it is a tragic mass shooting of many, or the shooting of a husband or wife in a domestic violence situation, or the killing of a gas station employee for a few dollars, or a confrontation that ends in one person pulling out a gun and ending the life of another and catastrophically altering his or her own life, we learn every day that Americans are gunning down fellow Americans. So how do we best move on after the traumatizing events that stop some of us from moving it off and others running for the gun store to stock up? What are we to do? Do we assign blame? Do we point fingers? Do we ignore it, becoming ever more comatose to the violence in our nation, in our neighborhoods, and sometimes in our own families? Dr. Bill Reed thought not, and we're here tonight to talk about gun violence, gun legislation, and other issues we've heard. I heard that some individuals thought that tonight a bunch of liberal professors were going to get together and try to get rid of the good old boys' guns. But I don't think that's what we're here about. I don't think that's the solution. I think it's a forum for us to think about the issues. We have a panel of smart people, as you've heard. We have varied perspectives and experience with crimes and guns and violence. As I noted, I get to gun issues of social sciences. I am trained to base decisions on evidence. And as such, what I want to spend my 2 minutes talking about tonight is the issue of research and access to data. Just as the National Rifle Association wants access to guns for gun owners, I want access to reliable and valid data for criminal justice officials, social scientists, and public health scholars. I believe with valid and reliable data, we can move towards reasonable gun legislation, reasonable decisions about what we do in our society about violence. And this should be based on sound research. I'm hopeful that we can make progress in reducing gun violence with research. Just a few weeks ago, on January 16th, President Obama took a step in the right direction, I believe, when he lifted what has operated as a 17-year ban on public health effects of gun violence. The entire time, those have been fighting this. We've had this ban, essentially. As reported in the Business Insider and other sources, the NRA had successfully lobbied Congress in the mid-1990s to prevent the CDC from researching the effects of guns and the root causes of gun violence, some of the causes that Annie's talking about tonight. The NRA was able to get Congress to pass a law stipulating that none of the funds made available for injury prevention and control at the CDC could be used to advocate or promote gun control. Furthermore, to make it clear that this meant the CDC should stay away from any research involved in guns, Republican Representative Jay Dickey removed $2.6 million from the CDC budget in 1996, which purposely was the exact amount the CDC spent on gun research in 1995. As I noted, Obama has essentially lifted the directive preventing research on gun violence by directing the CDC to do research on the causes and prevention of gun violence, including links between video games, media images, and violence. But we will have to see, if not lobby our Congress to fund the research, as Obama has asked for the funds, but Congress will have to release them. Relatedly, I would like to see the removal of current laws prohibiting the federal gun registry. When we watch crime dramas on television, our favorite detectives type something in the computer, and within minutes, voila, they have information about gun use and crime. The reality could be no different, could not be more different. When a law enforcement officer has a serial number for a gun and needs to trace the gun, he or she contacts someone at the National Tracing Center. The employees at the centers must call the manufacturer, then the wholesaler, and then the dealer to find the identity of the gun purchaser. This is a process that can take many days, especially when a gun dealer is going out of business, and the NTC worker is forced to go through boxes of files or unsearchable microfiche to find the information on the gun owner. Law enforcement is forced to follow this slow, manual routine in a time when practically every other aspect of our lives is computerized, because congressional lawmakers have rejected the idea of a central database of gun transactions because of the NRA's lobbying efforts against such a database, because they believe law enforcement is on the way. As we said tonight, that's not likely to happen. To reiterate, I'm here as an academic who sees the value of research and who sees restrictions on what we can and cannot study as a serious affront to my rights and our democracy. I agree with Dr. David Thatcher, former director of the CDC, who said, quote, "Anytime we restrict research, it is dangerous for public health and democracy."
Good evening. I'm Ed Tarver. I'm the United States Attorney for the Southern District of Georgia. I've enjoyed listening to the other panelists share their information, their views on gun violence and gun legislation and what, if anything, we should do. And so I'll start with my conclusions. You know, at the time of my appointment by President Obama, I had no background or experience as a prosecutor. I never tried a murder case. And the only criminal matters I participated in was as the indigent counsel for a defendant that the judge had forced me to represent. I can tell you in the 3+ years that I've been the United States Attorney, I've come to a couple of conclusions. One is that notwithstanding the enormity of the problem, we must do something. And two, that putting people in jail, locking them up for long periods of time and throwing away the key is not the answer. As I've said, my experience comes from my role as the United States Attorney for this district. The Southern District of Georgia United States Attorney's Office is one of 93 such offices in the United States, Puerto Rico, the Virgin Islands, Guam, and the Northern Mariana Islands. We are distinctive because in addition to our work with our state and local law enforcement agencies, we also have the benefit of working with our federal partners. We work with, on a daily basis, the FBI, ICE, ATF, Secret Service, the DEA, and a host of others. In the Southern District of Georgia, my office represents 43 counties and is divided into 6 districts. I have offices and courthouses in Savannah, Augusta, Brunswick, Waycross, Dublin, and Statesboro. The primary mission of my office is the enforcement of the federal criminal laws. For that obligation, in order to meet that duty, I have been given, the office has been given 29 full-time FTEs for attorneys. We have a total staff of about 72. But I have 29 lawyers that come to work every day to help us fulfill the mission of the office. To give you some idea of the enormity of the problem we face just in the Southern District of Georgia, of those 29 attorneys, assistant United States attorneys who work in my office, 22 of them do nothing but handle criminal matters. The other 7 work on civil matters. And so that kind of gives you, hopefully that will give you an indication of what our focus is. As part of our mission in the office, we prosecute a variety of federal gun charges. We prosecute felons in possession of firearms and/or ammunition. And I include the and/or ammunition is because at the state level, it's a crime for someone who has been convicted of a felony and who has gone to jail and served their felony sentence. After their release, it's a crime for them to possess a gun in the future. Or under the federal law, it's a crime for them to possess a gun, and it's also a crime for them to possess ammunition. And we've had to use that component of it from time to time. In addition to that crime, we also prosecute for possession of stolen firearms, and you've heard that mentioned by some on the panel, particularly Professor Reese, that he had 3 guns stolen. We also prosecute individuals for theft of firearms from licensed federal firearm licensees. And we also prosecute folks for the use of a firearm during a drug trafficking crime or a crime of violence. Now, in the Southern District of Georgia, those 43 counties that make up the Southern District of Georgia, each year, my office returns between 225 and 325 either single defendant indictments or multiple defendant indictments. Routinely, 1/3 to 1/2 of the indictments that we return include some type of gun charge. The gun charge that we see most often is the felon in possession cases, more so than any other. And for me, that's a concern because it's telling you, as we've heard before, a big problem of what we face is that those folks who are committing these gun crimes have committed crimes before. They're recidivists. And that's what we deal with a lot of the resources that are presented to us. And in response to this problem, in 2001, the Department of Justice designated its Project Safe Neighborhoods program, also referred to as the ceasefire program, to create safer neighborhoods through a sustained reduction in crime associated with gun violence and violent offenders. Project Safe Neighborhoods is a collaborative task force of state, federal, and local law enforcement and community groups that implements gun crime enforcement, intervention, and prevention initiatives. You'll see programs like Crime Stoppers and Weed and Seed and other programs like that that the federal government funds and that we try to implement through our offices that are used to address some of the crime, some of the gun violence that we see in our communities. And one of the things that I didn't tell you is that even though one-third to one-half of the indictments that we bring every year includes some type of gun charge, what I didn't tell you is that we're not able to prosecute all of the gun charges that we see. One of the uses of our PSN, or Project Safe Neighborhood Committee, is that we have a panel of federal, state, and local law enforcement officials who meet once a month, and we look through the defendants who committed some type of violent crime or gun chargeable crime. And we look through those to see which ones merit federal attention, which ones warrant some type of federal attention. The reason for that is that many times that my office will work with Ashley's office or work with Colonel Partain, and our goal is to prosecute at the federal level the worst of the worst. We do that because of the federal side for gun crimes. Many times the federal system offers more severe penalties, longer sentences than they would be able to get in the state system. And it's a very rare goal for Ashley and I fight about who's going to prosecute a defendant because we all want the same thing. We want that person to go away as long as possible, especially if they're wreaking havoc on the community. But notwithstanding the longer sentences, as I said earlier at the beginning, one of the things that we've learned and that I've learned from the time that I've been the United States Attorney is that it doesn't matter how many jails we build. It doesn't matter how long the sentences we are able to impose. Right now, for some gun crimes, we can sentence an individual to 15 years or more in federal confinement. And I'm sure many of you have heard when someone receives a federal sentence, there is no parole. They have to serve up to 85% of the time that's been that they've been sentenced to. And even in those cases where we can send folks off for long periods of time, I think that all of the folks in my office agree that we've not seen a decreasing amount of the crimes, the gun crimes, the gun violent crimes that come through our office. As has already been referred to, in response to gun violence, President Obama has led an effort to come up with concrete steps that can be taken right now to reduce gun violence, to help prevent massive shootings and to keep our children safe. The President believes, as I believe, that the Second Amendment guarantees an individual right to bear arms. I'll join the parade of folks up here who say that, I too own a weapon. I'm probably not as good of a marksman as most on the panel. It makes me think of the time I actually owned a shotgun. It was given to me as a gift so that I could go hunting with friends. And after the first hunting trip, my only instructions were that please don't shoot the dog because I was such a bad shot. But I do own a gun. But the President believes that the Second Amendment guarantees an individual right to bear arms. He also believes that we all have a responsibility to take all reasonable steps that we can to ensure that guns are used safely, that they don't fall into the wrong hands. And that's one of the big issues that we face. Some of the steps the President has proposed include strengthening our gun background checks, helping schools hire more resource officers, and making sure that mental health professionals know their options for reporting threats of violence. As I listened to Judge Craig, I thought about my early days in the United States Attorney's Office. fortunate that early into my term as the United States Attorney, one of the things that happened was we received an announcement that President Obama was going to travel to Savannah. And I learned very quickly that when the President announced that he is going to visit a particular area, a particular state, a particular community, one of the things that's done is that anybody that poses a threat to the President's safety is investigated and checked out. And that includes what I found was a number of people who from time to time will make threats against the President, folks who are going to threaten to do him some type of harm. And my first big decision came in that we had a service member, former service member, a distinguished member of our former member of our military who had retired. Had never been in trouble with the law before. No problems or occurrences during his military background, had a distinguished military career. And one day, sitting in his home during retirement, a voice started to tell him to kill the President of the United States. And in response to that voice, he wrote some letters telling the President that he was going to kill him. And so as you would expect, the Secret Service conducted their investigation. They found that he wasn't trying to hide from anybody. As far as he knew, he didn't believe that he had done anything wrong. He sent a couple of letters telling folks that he was going to kill the President of the United States. When they got to his home, like many of the panelists here, this gentleman owned weapons. He owned an enormous number of weapons. He owned weapons of all types. There were some assault weapons there. There were shotguns and handguns and weapons that could inflict a lot of pain and injury upon people. And the thing that probably distinguishes him from most of the defendants that we encounter, if you want to think about it, our government had trained him well on how to use every one of them. We took that gentleman into custody, and he remained there for a while, and he was required to required by the judge to undergo a psychiatric evaluation. And at the end of the psychiatric evaluation, the results were what we knew they would be, that he had some type of mental disease, would say, that he needed some treatment. And in his case, which is not the case for most defendants, his family had the means to provide for him to go to a private facility where he could get help, and they were going to pay for him. And the only thing that I had to do as the recent United States Attorney was to sign the approval to dismiss the indictment and to allow him to go and be provided with private treatment. The problem I had was that even though we all agreed, the one question that we couldn't figure out is, well, what were we going to do with all of the weapons that he had? Who assumed responsibility for them? Did we, as agents of the federal government, have the authority to confiscate, to forfeit, and to take them? That was a problem that took us a while to overcome. So I agree with Judge Craig and many of the folks on the panel about the mountain of difficulties that we face in addressing the Second Amendment and what we do and what we shouldn't do. I do believe that it is our time at this point in our lives in this country that we must do something. And no matter how difficult the problem is, we must do all that we can to find the answer. Thank you.
Colonel.
I've read a lot lately about the situation. I think it's heavily talked about in Georgia. You can have somebody well trained, and I'm talking about even from a law enforcement perspective, and even with these teachers and whatnot, but can they pull the trigger at that moment? And I question sometimes, I mean, you may think, and you may be mentally prepared, because I teach a lot of recruits, and I know my training over the years, you can train a lot, and you can shoot paper targets a lot. But when it gets down to that moment when you've got to do it, are you mentally prepared to do it? For teachers, I mean, I know this is a lot been said, a lot been talked about. I'm not sure. It's hard to say. I can't tell you, I mean, if you have a firearm, you know, are you prepared at that particular moment to do what you got to do? Even if you get all the training in the world. Because hesitation, and I think it has to be in our, because I read after action reports of law enforcement shootings. Hesitation by police officers, got police officers killed. Because the other guy's determined to do what he's going to do. I don't know, just like the shooting where 20 kids killed. I mean, he came into that school, I guarantee you, knowing what he was prepared to do and was going to do it. Whether an untrained professional, I'm not sure. Now, Doc here, these special forces guys, people like that, they're ready. I don't know. I'm just saying they've had that experience. I know some, but I don't know the everyday teacher. I'm not sure. I don't know the answer to that question. I mean, that's the only question I have for them. We train them. We put them in school, or they're in school, or they're ready to do what's got to be done when it comes to that particular moment. I don't know.
It seems to me that we already ask teachers to do way more than we pay them for. I'm just going to throw that out there so we think about it in terms of this. We are already asking them to take care of our children beyond what we used to ask them to do. We're asking them to be responsible for everything. And to then also arm them and expect them to, you know, pick off anybody who might come to the school. A lot of the kids just seems like we might not think of it.
Another thing is we work with a wonderful professor, a young teacher in the 7th grade. He's a PhD and teaches 7th grade. And he's in inner city school. And he said, just think, I am working in an inner city school where the kids have enough problems growing up. They were from single parent families. They have no guidance. Some of them like being gangs. And he said, can you imagine me with a gun? He said, I would have to lock it up in my desk drawer. And he said, can you imagine if the killer came in and intended to kill, how could I find the key that I had to hide in my coat pocket so the kids wouldn't want to find the key and open the desk drawer because they would like to play with the gun and exploit the gun because kids are very interested in guns. So he said, forget it. I am not going to take that responsibility. Dr. Davis is right. We have so many teachers to just focus on teaching, plus being counselors and babysitters, etc. So I think it'd be very difficult as Colonel Martinez said also.
And I might add to that, same kind of thing. Go back to my own personal experience as I talked when our 2 kids were home about owning a gun. And I think if I had done that, I would probably not have slept 1 wink of all the time that I owned a gun, for fear that somebody, either my kids or some of their friends, would get access to that weapon and cause just a horrendous accident. So I think when you consider doing things like that, you have to examine the consequences. The more guns you put in teachers' hands, you know, you got a lot of kids out there who, when they find out the teacher's got a gun, just as a matter of curiosity, you're going to go for it. You know that's going to happen. So you're setting up the potential for a great tragedy beyond which I just don't think you can measure the potential benefit.
I would like to suggest that the best way to arm teachers is to reduce class size, to start in kindergarten and let teachers be able to reach kids, push so that teachers can teach, let them use the strength that they have to reach kids. If you've ever coached, and I started coaching when I was 17, I was a college coach at age 19. I've helped raise kids, I've coached a lot. Have you ever tried to reach more than 5 kids at once and keep them in control? My Lord, it's impossible. You've got to got to give teachers a chance to do what they can do. And it starts at 3 and 4 years old. And if you don't have a kid by the time he's 12 or 13 years old, you're going to be seeing him someplace else. Ashley will see him. Partain will see him. We got to give them a chance before they are out there and able to exercise their own free will, and they're being raised by guys who are 16 who we let down in the first 10 place. We turn kids loose at 18, and they are not prepared for this world. We should, instead of investing in colleges, we should be taking all the money and putting it in kids back at 16, so that when they're 16 and they leave high school, they know what they can do. They can survive. They can do something to survive. We're still suffering from the Industrial Revolution. And we're turning kids out of school, and they can't survive in a legitimate way. We owe kids a real education, a meaningful education. Not just that everybody gets to go to Harvard. Well, if everybody goes to Harvard, what jobs do they all get? I told my kids, when they were getting ready to go to school, college, you don't need to go to school. College is not that necessary. We need to push it back. Kids can learn. Kids can think. Put some trust in kids. And we aren't giving the teachers and kids a chance by we make classes too big. You got to have stuff for them to do every day so that they don't come home and watch the TV box. They got to interact with people.
Yeah. Doesn't seem me.
I have a comment and then a question. I liked the quote from Dr. Martin Luther King that it's not a choice between violence and nonviolence. It's a choice between nonviolence and non-resistance. And I think that's where we are as a nation, and I take that to heart. But it feels like I'm hearing things like, oh, we can't, from a legislative point of view. Oh, well, we can do a collection of data, but we really can't do it because they won't fund it. And I'm thinking, well, that seems to be a bit defeatist. So my question is, didn't Australia already do this? It took 17 years. It was a slow process. But if we go, oh, we can't, then, yeah, we won't. So I'm thinking, can we demand just the research money, just that? Isn't that a good start, Dr. Davies? The demanding of the funding of the collection of data so we can figure out how can we. First, what is the problem and how can we? But last question, are other countries who have these violent video games also as violent as we are?
No.
So the collection of data would include this information and how to use that. Thank you.
Hi, Old Green Mountain. First, I'd like to congratulate the panel. It was a fascinating and wonderful discussion that each of you gave us today, and I wish that we had 2,000 people here to listen to you. I would like to make a comment and then ask a question. My comment goes to what Judge Craig had mentioned. In 1992, they started closing mental hospitals. What was still going on in Georgia? In the last year or so, the mental hospitals in Georgia have been closing down to the consternation of the parents and the families of these people who are being, I don't know what happens to them. And it's the wrong direction to cut the budget, which of course the administration is trying to do. That's my comment. My question is, as was just discussed, there are three things that stand out in the overall discussion of gun control. One is that there should be a registry for all guns sold. In other words, background checks, I should say, on people who buy guns. I don't know if that's practical. But that seems to be the one area where a lot of people can agree on because of the Second Amendment. The other point is that the magazines, which hold 100 bullets, be abolished, and just a small number of bullets. And the third is the fact with assault weapons, which I don't think is going anyplace. So can you discuss or agree on this background checks, whether that would be effective for us to maintain safety of our children? That's the question. Why don't we start with Judge Gray?
Well, with regard to your background checks, remember when guns are sold at retail by licensed gun dealers, there is a registration. And so what I think, just to restate the question, it would be, why can't we just broaden that and make it so that when individuals sell between themselves. Now, when I sell you my car, I'm subject to that registration. But remember this, it's pretty difficult for you to hide that car and use it as well. So if you're in the streets with the car, which is designed to be used for, then police officers can certainly see whether or not it's registered. Not single guns, they're easily concealed. And my point to you is that this would be strictly a matter of voluntary compliance. And the people, Americans are pretty smart people. It's amazing what Americans are capable of. It's amazing how, if you give them the information, what they can do with it. My point to you is, Dr. Greenbaum, is this. If we pass that law, then the criminals certainly are not going to comply with it, because they can transfer, because a lot of the guns they transfer are stolen